Hello, Mr. President, and welcome to the Homeless Consultants channel. My name is Paul B., and I also want to welcome you to my home. This is the car that I live in. I want to express my gratitude to your staff and the people close to you who I contacted to share my work with them. I really appreciate them giving me fair consideration and referring this video to you. What I want to do here is offer you, in my opinion, the 50 greatest existential threats to America, as I see it, based on the qualifications that I submitted to the people I did near you. And in this particular video, I'm just going to list them out quickly with minimal commentary in deference to your time. And then I will create other videos where I take 10 of them at a time and I go in detail. Before I do that, I just need to give you a brief explanation of what happened to me ending up in this car, because it has relevance to many of these threats. It illustrates them in many ways, and also there's a certain poetic justice to this video that I think you in particular will greatly appreciate. So what happened was, I moved to Minnesota about 12 years ago, and things went fine for a while. I had an apartment, a good job, everything was good. I was building a home studio for audio recording, video recording and such. And after a few years, neighbors started moving into the apartment building who were, shall we say, less than civilized. And they would scream and yell, bang and pound, the building would physically shake. And this was my home that I paid for. It violated our lease. It made my life intolerable, and as it built up that way, as the people who were there when I moved in were replaced by these people who were largely either on welfare or selling drugs or something of that nature, my home life became absolutely intolerable. It was traumatizing for me to be inside my own home. My landlord refused to do anything about it, and as I took this to the police, the city council, all the way through all the agencies that you should, in order, all the way up to Governor Mark Dayton's office, not even one person would help me. They just didn't care. And yet, they all collected their paychecks. My landlord collected his rent from me, which I paid on time every month up until I left. But he wouldn't do the job I was paying him to do, which was in the lease that he wrote. So this really was totally debilitating to me. Also, as this began, as these people started moving in and this noise began, I lost both of my parents. Both of my parents died relatively close to each other within the same year. On top of that, when this had come to a head and I was truly, absolutely debilitated in my home because I'd gone through all these channels, and now I not only had the problem at home to deal with, but I had the knowledge that all these people out there were that heartless and that they didn't care and that they were that corrupt, that they would accept paychecks without doing their job. And when you pile all that on, I couldn't do anything at home except literally just curl up in a ball in one corner. I couldn't use the kitchen, I couldn't use the bathroom. It was a torture chamber. That's what happens in a situation like that. At that time, a new president came into our company, which was a multinational company based here in Minnesota. He was a Minnesotan. And the first thing he did was fire a whole bunch of people, including me, with no advance notice. So he just cleaned house without bothering to learn how the company works. And he ruined a lot of lives on that day, particularly mine. By the way, as he destroyed the company, he then, as the company was starting to fall down and crash, he jumped out with his golden parachute with millions of dollars and just left us to clean up the devastation. So when all that happened, my landlord, because I kept pressing him to help me and he wouldn't, he performed a constructive eviction instead. And I'm sure you know what that is. He made my life so intolerable deliberately to make sure that I had no option but to move away. And he has never been held accountable for this, ever. Not even a little bit. He got away with it scot-free. I lost everything I'd worked my entire life for. Everything. At the time, I lived north of Minneapolis. When I became homeless and had to live in the car, I moved south of Minneapolis where I thought there would be more opportunities. One of the first things I did was contact the state of Minnesota in writing. I told them I want you to cancel my voter's registration at my former residence so that nobody could use it fraudulently. And I want you to confirm back to me in writing that you have done so. Several months later, when the 2016 elections came, I went to the polling place, which was the correct polling place for where I had been sleeping in this car. I went there to register to vote and to vote. And sir, I want you to know I was going to vote for you. But I also, in particular, wanted to vote out of office those people who had been collecting paychecks and who refused to do anything for me, who were so callous. They refused to enforce their own laws, their own rules, regulations. For me, they would do it for other people, but they wouldn't do it for me. When I was at the polling place, I found out that I was denied my right to vote by the state of Minnesota because I was homeless. Now, the state of Minnesota does have a process, a procedure in place to allow homeless people to vote. But if you're actually homeless, you realize that that process is fundamentally absurd in many, many ways, but not the least of which is the fact that if I were to follow the rules they wanted to, it puts me at mortal risk. I'm not going to explain that here, but this was clearly an attempt to just prevent the homeless from voting. And yet, as I asked the elections judge some probing questions, I found that even though I came in the door telling the truth, that I'm homeless, I need to register to vote so I can vote, I asked him, what about all these other people out here who don't tell you their situations? Do you look into them? Are they prohibited from voting? And he said no. So in other words, someone could walk in who perhaps is not a citizen of this nation, and they could vote using, say, a voter's registration that was abandoned, like the one that I had abandoned north of Minneapolis. So they were allowed to vote. I was not allowed to vote, even though I'm a natural-born citizen. At the polling place, I filled out the 2 complaints that I am allowed to. I filled out those documents completely and accurately. I photographed them to document them. I had the elections judge notarize them and submit them to the state of Minnesota. That election was 3 years ago, sir. 3 years ago. That is 156 months ago, which is about 1,100 days, I believe. That's 1,100 days that the people who received these forms and who received my request to cancel my voter's registration have been receiving paychecks. In that time, while they collect all that money week after week after week, I have received no response from any of them whatsoever. Sir, these people are lazy bums. And yet, for the last, now going into my 5th year homeless, people look at me as if I'm a lazy bum just because I'm homeless. And yet, in my work, which I do work for a living, I do a better job, I work harder, longer, in more depth, I take more responsibility than anyone else there, I am more ethical, more moral, I do a better job, perfect attendance, than anybody I work with, and that's the way it's always been for me at any job. Even in these circumstances, I have managed to maintain that level of performance. And yet, simply because I'm homeless, people who don't even know me will assume that I'm a lazy bum, but they assume the very best about all these people who could have saved me from this fate, but they did nothing for me. A man who had no family. When my parents died, I was alone in this world. The poetic justice that I think you'll appreciate is this. Because I have battled against the state of Minnesota all along through this. They do not care if I live or die. And off camera, they will make that perfectly clear. They laugh, they chuckle, they think it's funny that I'm suffering this way. On camera, they open and close their mouths and sound like they care, but that has no relevance. It doesn't do anything. Off camera, they make it perfectly clear you can just go away. Okay. For example, I contacted all 200 Minnesota legislators, all 200 of them by email, individually, so that it would not be filtered out as spam, for help about my homeless problem. I received 2 responses out of 200. One of them said, "Send me your home address so that I may send you a written response," which is lunacy. The second one simply said, "No thank you." That's how much they care off camera about someone in my situation. Those are the kinds of battles I have fought against. So the poetic justice is this. If these people are going to put on a show like this for the American people, for their constituents, pretend that they care about anybody other than themselves when they don't, and one of the things they're going to do is make sure that the homeless are not allowed to vote, then I'm going to find something that gives me a force multiplier effect so that my voice can be heard by government with an impact that goes far beyond what my one single vote ever could have done. That is the reason for this video, sir, and that is the reason why I'm making this video for the President of the United States. And I hope you appreciate what I'm doing here. If they are going to deny me my right to vote and think that I am just going to sit in this car and wait until I die, they've got another thing coming. I was born an American, I am an American, and even if they deny me my right to vote, I'm going to fulfill my duties as a citizen of the United States of America. That's what this video is for. So having said that, what I'm going to do is list out the 50 greatest existential threats to America as I see it, based upon my lifelong, ever since I became an adult, 30 years of me fighting against domestic enemies. And I would like to point out one thing, sir. There are many people out there who do what I do. I am not alone. There are many people who have devoted their entire lives. I gave up having a family of my own for this because I cared so much about these issues, so much about this country's future. I don't have a family of my own because I put all my time, energy, money, resources into this. But in the process, I learned more about this country and how it works on the ground, having traveled the whole country, researching all the time. I know more about what's going on here than most people do. So my perspective really is valid and legitimate. There are many of us who do this, though, sir. We are not part of a military who is defending this country in an organized fashion from domestic enemies, like our military defends in an organized fashion against international enemies. We do not receive training. We do not receive resources. We do not receive equipment. We have to buy that with our own money. We do not receive any kind of acknowledgement or appreciation from the American people for what we do. We do not get medals of honor. We do not get veterans benefits. We get nothing. We just devote our lives to this, and we die, we're buried underground, and few people ever even know that we did it. There are a lot of people out there who are trying to save this country in sane, sober, rational ways that involve hard work, a lot of research, and letting a lot of the pleasantries of life go in favor of doing that. I love this country, sir. I think it's the greatest country that has ever existed, and that's why I want to present you with these 50 threats. If you'll excuse me, age happens. I do need to use these. I'm going to read you the 50 with minimal commentary. Notice that they overlap, they step on each other's toes, they're related to each other in many ways. And because of that, some of them alone may not exactly present an existential threat, but in combination with others, they most certainly do. And remember, I will be taking 10 of these at a time in future videos where I explain them in great depth. I ask that you will have your staff watch those as well. And if they find anything in there that they believe you can benefit from hearing, that they will present you with that information. If you have the time to watch them all, I would be honored beyond belief. But I understand your time constraints. And in deference to those time constraints, let's get started with the 50, shall we? Number 1 is cults and cult mentalities. And to me, this is the fundamental one that underlies all the other 49. Humans are tribal animals by nature, and that's a good thing. That's where families come from. That's where nations come from. It's a good thing. But it can get out of control. It can be taken to absurd extremes. When that happens, we have a cult. Likewise, cult mentality means that we are abdicating our independent critical thinking in favor of blind acceptance of answers. All of this involves one thing in common. It involves not thinking competently. And sir, if we do not understand how cult mentality underlies what's going on in this country, then so many of the things that we see that don't make any sense will never have an explanation. All these attacks against you that make absolutely no sense. People accuse you of things that have nothing to do with you. and yet they're adamant about it. That's a cult mentality. Okay, so moving along, number 2 is political correctness. I am so pleased that you understand the threat there, sir. Number 3 is subversion of the U.S. Constitution, both in the private sector and within government itself. When it happens in the public sector, it is sedition, a capital offense. When it happens in government, it is treason, a capital offense. We are not treating this with the seriousness that it needs to be treated with, sir. And if we don't do it, they're going to win. They are undermining the Constitution at every turn. Number 4 is an abysmal education system that fails to educate at all, and it merely indoctrinates and does even worse to our children. I'll leave it at that for now. Related to this is number 5, the student loan racketeering industry. There is nothing legitimate whatsoever about the student loan industry, sir. There are many people out there who are trying very hard to get you this information, and they can't. I will explain that in the further video, but we're destroying generations of our most motivated and well-educated people through the student loan industry. Racketeering industry, I should say. Number 6 is junk science. Junk science has taken over science. There really isn't much legitimate science left in this country or in the world, but it started here about 50 years ago. You're seeing it with the climate change, but there's an awful lot more that went on before climate change. Climate change is just following a playbook that has been developed over the last half century. They just check the boxes. I can predict what they're going to do next because they're following a plan. Nothing to do with science whatsoever. Junk science has taken over control of public policy. Unelected people who call them, they're not even scientists, they're people who call themselves scientists. And they find a peer who will call them a scientist, and they think that makes them legitimate. Those people are dictating public policy without being elected. Needs to stop. Number 7 is the slow death of patriotism, and along with that is the American people's lack of understanding what the purpose of nations is. And sir, thank you so much for your speech, your recent speech at the United Nations, because I was amazed. You explain to the United Nations what the purpose of nations is. You understand it. And I am so grateful for this. Unfortunately, the American people never saw that speech because the news media didn't bother to actually show anybody. Number 8 is illegal immigration. Something that you understand. I'll leave it at that for now. Number 9 is career politicians. How people living on public servant salaries can be a career politician and end up as multimillionaires, you got to start asking questions when that happens. Number 10 is judges legislating from the bench. Our Constitution defines 3 branches of government: the executive, the legislative, the judicial. They serve as checks and balances against each other so that not one branch can become overpowering. The judges, however, have decided that they're not only going to do their job, they're going to go ahead and do the legislature's job as well. Even though they were not elected to pass our laws, they're going to go ahead and legislate from the bench anyway. That violates their oath of office. It violates the Constitution. These people need to be stopped. They are threats to the United States of America. Number 11 is big, huge, gargantuan government, which was defined by a Constitution that is only 4 handwritten pages long. Something is wrong, sir. 4 pages of handwritten text do not define the massive scale of invasive government that we have today. It was never supposed to happen. Number 12 is exorbitant taxes and taxation without representation. We have gone full circle right back to the original complaints in the Declaration of Independence against King George III. We need to do something about people who work for a living having their money literally stolen from them at gunpoint by their own government so that it can be wasted on whatever little pet projects these government officials have. Number 13 is socialism. Once again, sir, I can't thank you enough for understanding the threat there and for trying to deal with it. Number 14 is the hijacking of the constitutionally protected press by seditious special interests. Again, undermining the Constitution, but they're hijacking the Constitution itself in order to protect themselves as they destroy the Constitution. They're hiding beneath the First Amendment when they take over these media outlets so that they can use the media to destroy the rest of the Constitution. These people need to be stopped. You call it fake news. I've called it something else for 30 years. I've been dealing with it for 30 years. Number 15 is lawlessness. And by that I do not mean a lack of laws. We have far too many laws. But the problem is they're either not enforced or they are enforced selectively, as in my case, where we had laws against the kind of abuse and torture I was subjected to by my neighbors, but they would not enforce it on my behalf. They would enforce it on the mayor's behalf if it happened to the mayor, if his neighbors was torturing him in his home. But they wouldn't do it for me. Also, in the Bible it says in the end times, because lawlessness shall abound, the hearts of many shall grow cold. There's a correlation between this anarchy, this lawlessness that we're experiencing today, and the way that people respond to others, the way we relate to other human beings. So it's not just a legal issue, it is a human issue. Very big problem. Number 16 is the deliberate destruction of the family. The people who want to destroy America are going after our core institutions that served as the foundation of this nation. The legal system, etc., the media. The family they are trying to destroy. One reason I'm in this situation when I am as competent as I am is because I had no family to fall back on for help. Now, if this can happen to someone with my education and my motivation, my willingness to work hard, my sobriety, my sanity, if this can happen to me living in a car for 5 years because I don't have any family support, what are hundreds of millions of Americans going to do when they experience something that's as serious as this and they don't have the family support they used to? It's a threat to the nation itself. Number 17 goes with this, the exploitation of children and lost childhood innocence. And this covers a lot of areas. The government has been turning a blind eye to the exploitation of children for too long. It is possible that aspects of this government have been participating in the exploitation and abuse and possibly even the trafficking of children. Jeffrey Epstein, when he was arrested and faced with life in prison, he became enemy number one of some very, very bad people who don't treat children very well. And for that reason, he was the most likely person out of hundreds of millions in the United States. He was the most likely person to be assassinated. And somehow he was killed anyway. Or he died. Or he killed himself. Who knows? The point is, how could that possibly happen? We need to give children back their innocence. I am tired of people with special interests shoving a sign into a child's hand that reads something that they don't even understand. They don't have the knowledge, the life experience, the critical thinking skills, and they're out there shouting slogans. That is child abuse, sir. And we see that from everything from anti-smokers to climate change. You dealt with it with this Greta girl, who is having her childhood stolen right in front of the world's eyes, and nobody's doing anything to give her her childhood back. Number 18 is the end of grace, manners, decorum, and civility. Our ancestors were at least polite and respectful of each other, even when they disagreed with each other. They would tip their hat and say hello. They would open the door for another person. We've lost this. We've become almost barbarians in our behavior. And sir, if I may be so bold, the change here has to begin with you and with me. If we understand the problem here, we need to temper our statements. We need to work hard to overcome the incivility that we were raised with ourselves, because this was lost several generations ago. Number 19 is laziness, sloth, and a sense of entitlement. And of course this takes place in our welfare system and our social service system, but more than that perhaps, what about all these so-called professionals I dealt with? My landlord all the way up to the governor of Minnesota. And they were all completely lazy and incompetent. They refused to do their jobs that they're paid for. I have never seen such laziness as I did trying to fight this battle to prevent myself from becoming homeless or to get out of it. And it's all professionals that I've been dealing with. Attorneys, I'll leave it at that for now. Number 20 is the publishing industry. The publishing industry used to be a great marketplace of ideas. Now it is nothing more than a bullhorn for propaganda for these specific agendas. Number 21 is racketeering and monopolies. I've already alluded to racketeering earlier with the student loan industry. Racketeering and monopolies are not being dealt with. We are not having antitrust suits. The last one I remember that was successful was the breakup of Ma Bell, 35, 40 years ago? What about these tech industries, Google, Facebook, Twitter? What about the government? The government is running rackets. They were running the student loan industry until they privatized it, although they're still a part of it. That's how big those rackets really are. Number 22 is corporate corruption, inhumanity, and dehumanization. Corporations have created a new form of human slavery, and it's a disgusting form. And the sad truth is, this one is harder to free people from than the disgusting form of slavery we had in this country 150 years ago. Look what happened to me. What I think I was their best employee, and whether people agree with that or not, I was certainly one of their best employees, without a doubt. No one can challenge that. And yet, some yahoo comes into the presidency there and immediately fires me because he doesn't understand how the company works. And they just turn me around at the door after 8 years of working there and tell me to go home. That's inhumane. This kind of treatment of not just employees but customers as well, it needs to be fundamentally overhauled. It needs to be changed. Number 23 is negligent, incompetent, and corrupt social services. Sir, I have never asked for food stamps. I've never asked for welfare. I've never applied for it. I don't want it. I've always wanted to work for a living, even after becoming homeless. But I have gone through the social services to see what they have to offer. I research anything, no matter where I am, no matter what my situation is. So I have a lot of research now into how social services works, particularly with respect to the homeless. And sir, it is a complete farce. It is a fraud. And it is probably one of the biggest chunks of most state budgets that go towards social services. It's completely incompetent from the very bottom. It's corrupt. It's incompetent. It's negligent. The only people who are being served by social services are the people who run social services. They have job security. The people they're supposed to be helping are suffering and dying in quiet desperation off camera because this corrupt news media will not cover the stories that actually matter in this country. They will not cover my story. Number 24 is health fascism. Now, nobody seems to understand what the word fascism means, but of course it involves a symbiotic relationship between government and corporations, dictating terms of existence for people. The healthcare industry no longer has much to do with healthcare, does it? And I'm talking about a lot more than just Obamacare. They are these health companies and nonprofit organizations, people who claim to care about other people's health, whether they do or not, they are taking over dictatorial control over the minutia of people's lives. It needs to stop in a free country. Even health is not a good enough reason to take away a person's freedom and enslave them, especially when you're enslaved to these lunatics in the healthcare industry. Number 25 is abortion and Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood is the most disgusting organization I have ever seen. Sir, they sailed right past the Dark Ages to land squarely in ancient times, where the pagan blood sacrifice of children was considered socially acceptable. They're sacrificing children for fun and for profit. Any nation that allows that to go on, and which takes a gun and puts it to American citizens' heads and says, you will pay for this whether you agree with it or not, any nation that does that is doomed to destruction. We have lost all moral credibility throughout the world by murdering millions of our most defenseless citizens every single year. There is no such thing as a more defenseless citizen than the one that is in the womb of its mother. And yet we go in with pliers and we rip their body parts apart and sell them for profit. And we force the American people to pay for this. It needs to stop. We've lost our moral high ground. to that one industry alone. Number 26 is 501c3 tax-exempt status for churches. Now, I'm not entirely sure how valid that is for any nonprofit organization, but especially for churches. When you introduce a profit potential for churches, you eliminate the purpose of the church in the first place. Churches are supposed to struggle and suffer. That's what brings them closer to God. It brings them into dependency on God. Right now, they're dependent on government instead. And the government can tell them what they can say and what they cannot say, using the threat of taking away their tax exemption as a weapon. We need to just remove that tax exemption, sir, so that to save the church. And if you'll excuse me, it's actually very cold out here and my voice is dying, if you'll pardon me. Okay, number 28 is the weaponization of personal information. This is something I have expertise on. Ever since I was in graduate school in computer science in the early 1990s, I have known exactly how computers are being used to gather and search and sort and weaponize information about individuals. It's a huge problem, sir. You've experienced it recently yourself with this, Russian collusion nonsense and the NSA servers. This also includes the credit reporting industry, which is completely incompetent. It's a major threat to the American people. Number 29 is, of course, the national debt. I'm not even going to say more about it right now. That one should be so obvious. We'll say more later. Number 30 is ignorance of and denial of the law of supply and demand. Now, sir, the law of supply and demand is the fundamental law of economics. Just like in Newtonian mechanics, Newtonian physics, you could argue that gravity, the laws that express how gravity functions, are the fundamental laws of mechanics. It's not quite true, but you can think of it that way. Just like in electronics, there's fundamental laws like Ohm's law. If you violate those laws, there are not only consequences, but very serious consequences. If you violate the law of gravity by stepping outside of a plane because you think you're going to just float down gently, you're going to learn the hard way that you can't violate that law. If you violate Ohm's law, you're going to turn on your electronic device and possibly start a fire or blow something up. You can't violate the law of supply and demand. And yet, the American people don't even understand what the law of supply and demand is. And this includes professionals, people who are running corporations, and I would dare say many of the people at the Federal Reserve. It's a big, big problem that I will talk about. Number 31. Number 31 is a little tricky to explain, but basically the nation has lost faith in its government because it is repeatedly lied to about these horrific tragedies, horrifically unexplainable events that happen, and we get nothing but ridiculous explanations. I'm talking about things like the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. The government says one bullet went through a whole bunch of people and killed them. The slaughter of 76 men, women, and children in Waco, Texas on international television. The man who did the most to cover that up, Mr. Chuck Schumer, was rewarded for that by going from the House of Representatives into the Senate, representing New York. Once he was there, he was able to bring in Hillary Clinton as the next senator, so that she could use that as a springboard to the presidency. All of that was built on the burned flesh of 76 men, women, and children. What about TWA 800? The only plane out of millions of flights that just spontaneously exploded in its empty fuel tank? Even though so many very qualified witnesses, they even took out an ad in a national newspaper saying that they saw a missile hit that plane. What about 9/11? How did a 47-story steel skyscraper reinforce the emergency command center for New York City, for heaven's sakes? How did that skyscraper just fall to the ground, straight down, at the acceleration of gravity when it wasn't hit by a plane? And why didn't the news media bother to tell anybody that Building 7 fell like that? What happened in Benghazi when we deserted our ambassador Chris Stevens and he was beaten and dragged through the streets? How are the American people supposed to have any faith in their government to protect them if our ambassador was left to suffer and die like that, and they cover it up. Sir, we need answers to these. The American people have lost all faith in their government, and with very good reason, because we are constantly lied to about these. This isn't about conspiracy theory. Even if the official story was correct, the way it has been gone about explaining what happened is so insufficient and includes so little supporting data that makes any rational sense that we can't have faith in it even if they're telling the truth. Our government should be much more transparent. Number 32 is mind-altering substance abuse. Number 33 is very similar, television and social media, which have, in the mind, they have the same impact, they have the same effect on the brain as mind-altering substances. There's people out there trying to legalize mind-altering substances when they are one of the greatest threats to us functioning as competent human beings. We've got a big problem here, sir. Number 34 is loneliness, isolation, depression, despair, and trauma among the citizenry. Millions of Americans who feel alone, depressed, in despair, they feel isolated. They feel traumatized in many ways by their own government. We can't survive this way, sir. But I tell you what, if we fix the other 49 problems here, I bet that one will go away on its own. Because it's all these problems that are causing people to be so sad. They need better lives. They deserve better lives. These are Americans. They deserve better lives. Number 35 is separation from nature. There are people who grow up and they live in a city their whole lives. They have no comprehension of the awesomeness of the night sky. And if you don't understand that, how are you going to appreciate the one who created that? Instead, you're going to go listen, you're going to stare at your television set and listen to whatever explanation some human tells you there. But if you go outside and you interact with nature, nature tells you a whole different story, and it's a story you cannot argue with. Number 36 is the other side of that coin, out of control environmentalists. These people have gone off the deep end. They talk about everything from, someone smoking a cigarette is a threat to everyone's lives, to climate change, which has no legitimate scientific basis. The one thing they won't talk about is the real legitimate problem when it comes to the environment, which is pollution. Pollution is probably what's responsible for most of these modern diseases. We don't even address it. You look at the homeless trash buildup that people are talking about, complaining about, that's a microcosm of what's happening to the entire planet. But you see it when it's in a small area, but you don't notice it so much when it's spread out throughout the planet. What's happening there with all the diseases it brings is happening to our entire planet, and these environmentalists don't even want to talk about it because they've got other agendas. Personal agendas. Needs to stop. We need to start worrying about the species, the country, instead of these people and their personal agendas. Number 37 is the end of heroes. Sir, when I grew up in the 70s and the 80s, I had legitimate heroes. One wall was covered, in my bedroom, was covered with guitar heroes. Eddie Van Halen, Jimi Hendrix, Alex Lifeson, etc. The other wall was covered with great scientists. Albert Einstein, Johannes Kepler, Galileo, Isaac Newton. I had heroes like Hank Aaron. I had heroes like Evel Knievel, the Lone Ranger. What do kids have today? They don't have any heroes at all. In fact, these people who want to destroy the country have taken a hatchet and they've done everything they can to chop down these heroes, to discredit them, to malign them, to mock them, humiliate them. Our heroes today are corporate, manufactured pop culture icons. And it started in the scientific world with people like Carl Sagan, Stephen Jay Gould, people who accomplished, as near as I can tell, nothing of any particular significance in the scientific world, but the propaganda machine behind them allows them to have more influence over people today than the great legitimate scientists of our past. Number 38 is energy. We have incredible energy needs, and they're only going to get more demanding. We are not even approaching this in a remotely rational way. We're approaching it as if we were still back in the steam engine era. These solar panels and 3-blade turbines, they don't even work. They're a complete waste of resources and time, and yet that's what we're focused on. Coal, it pollutes. Nuclear is a threat to the entire species, every species on Earth ultimately. Oil pollutes and it encourages war, global conflict. We need to redo the way we're going about energy. Number 39 is suicidal trade agreements. Go ahead and watch what Bill Clinton's comments on when he signed NAFTA, and show me where anywhere in those comments he gave a rational argument and well-documented support for what he was claiming. It was nothing but manipulative rhetoric is all he spoke on that. Empty promises. I am so glad you understand the problem with these trade agreements. Number 40 is the lack of competent contingency planning. By that I mean not just FEMA and emergency management against natural disasters. We need to plan against every contingency. This nation did not plan against, say, an internal communist assault, an attempt to subvert the Constitution. We didn't plan ahead for that, so we weren't ready for it, and we ended up reacting. And the problem is, evil always has the advantage, at least in the beginning, because they don't play by rules. So the good people have to figure out what's going on before they can even address it. We should have been planning for it in advance. Our nation does not do that. That's one of the things we have never done well. We need to be better at contingency planning. That is a function of government that protects the American people. Number 41 is somewhat related in one area: dwindling support for our military and concern for veterans. On 9/11, our Air Force looked like the Three Stooges. They have hardly any planes in the sky. They're sending them out over the ocean. They're running around in circles. We can hear recordings of them saying, is this real or is this an exercise? They don't have the foggiest idea what's even going on. That should have never happened. Our military is spread all around the world so that we could literally be invaded. I don't think anyone would be crazy enough to do that, but we could be invaded. And it would take years and a lot of bloodshed and a lot of pain and suffering to get our country back, because our military isn't even here. Thank you for what you're doing for our veterans, by the way. Those are our heroes, and they should be regarded as such. Number 42 is terrorism. Still a threat? I believe it's a greater threat than it's ever been before. Number 43 is law enforcement. Law enforcement has a lot of problems. On the one hand, they're getting out of control. They're getting arrogant, power hungry. They're kicking down doors in full riot gear, sticking a machine gun in a child's head, shooting the dog when they don't even know if a crime's been committed. This is Banana Republic. This is Soviet Union style law enforcement. It needs to stop immediately. On the other hand, most people in law enforcement out there are good and decent public servants, and they deserve our utmost respect because they're putting their lives on the line every day to protect us. And they're being mocked and humiliated when they shouldn't be. We should be treating them better, we should be supporting them, and frankly, we should be paying them better. And last thing on that I'll say is that when it goes back to lawlessness and the corruption in our government, the laws that our law enforcement are charged with enforcing are so often absurd and unjust. It isn't right to require law enforcement as part of their job to enforce laws that they find morally reprehensible. Number 44 is what I call the homeless holocaust. Millions of Americans living not just like I am. Most of them are living worse than I am. They don't even have a car to sleep in. My whole channel talks about this, sir. My channel gets maybe 10 views, 20 views for each video. Number 45 is, and I'm not trying to joke here, I'm being dead serious. Number 45 is stupidity. Stupidity is different than ignorance. Ignorance means you just don't have knowledge. You don't know something. You lack that particular information. Stupidity means that the way you process information about the world you live in, even if you're given accurate information, you're not able to process that properly. That's stupidity. Now, there are people who are born with brain deficiencies that make them, behave that way. They are stupid. They are. But stupidity in the general population is learned. And if it is learned, it is taught. The question is, who is teaching Americans to be so stupid, and why are they doing it? They are the threats to the United States of America. Number 46 is the radical left. They've gone completely insane. This is not a political ideology. This is a cult. Goes right back to number 1 on my list. I'm going to leave it at that for now because I could speak on that all day. Number 47 is one of the worst consequences of the radical left, which is hatred and discord. All throughout this nation, everyone's against everyone else. We're not working together at all. We hate each other. We fear each other. We're fighting each other. Conflict everywhere. And it's largely the radical left who has promoted that, even as they claim to be talking about saving the children and tolerance. What they say with their mouths has nothing to do with their actual actions. A house divided against itself cannot stand. They are deliberately dividing this house, this nation. Furthermore, there was a song back in the 60s by the Yardbirds. It was called Puzzles. My band used to cover this song. One of the lyrics in there says, "Love, war, people arguing. How do they know what to hate?" And that's the question. How do they know what to hate? How do the people who are attacking you so violently today, how do they know to hate you? They weren't born with that. You have done nothing to deserve it. How do they know to hate you? Somebody is teaching them how to hate. And those people want to destroy this country. We need to go after the source and show some more empathy for the people who are sucked into these cults, because they are our fellow citizens, and we need to rescue them from this cult. Number 48 is the globalist cabal. Call it the New World Order, call it the Deep State, call it the Illuminati, whatever you want to call it. We all know there's people out there who want to take over. They want to destroy this country, at least to the extent that it is no longer a buffer against world government. World government means we no longer have any outside entity who can rescue us from a tyranny. World government is the most stupid idea that could ever be presented to a tribal species. It makes no rational sense at all. And yet, these people have the money and the power. They need to be stopped. They are enemies of this country. They are literally trying to destroy this country. When Japan attacked our nation at Pearl Harbor, we mobilized the entire nation, everyone, men, women, children, employees, soldiers, everyone mobilized to destroy that threat to this country. And we did. We're not doing anything to destroy this globalist cabal. They need to be treated as the threat that they are, sir. They have declared war on us. Why haven't we declared war back on them? Number 49, again, I do not mean to be facetious. I am not joking here, dead serious. The number 49 greatest existential threat to America is California. California is an example of mass hysteria, mass delusion, mass insanity. It's on par, and I'm not trying to just bring this in because I can. When you look at what happened in Germany under the Nazi regime, you have to ask the question, how could those people get sucked into a cult like that and actually believe it and be willing to give up their lives for it, be willing to send their children to die for that lunacy? How could they do it? And then 2-3 years after the war's over, they're back to normal. They're like, oh, I can't believe I fell for that. After hundreds of millions of people had their blood shed, that's their answer is, well, I can't believe I fell for that. What was I thinking? California is spreading its disease throughout this nation, in particular to your home state of New York. California needs to be stopped. And again, we need to do so with love and empathy. Those people in California are our neighbors. They're our fellow citizens. They are not the enemy. It's the people who are pulling the strings of these cult members who are the threat, and we need to get rid of them. And once we get rid of them, 2 or 3 years later, the people in California are going to be going, I can't believe I fell for that. What was I thinking? The same thing that happened when we defeated Nazi Germany. Same thing that happened when we defeated Imperial Japan. Number 50, the 50th greatest threat to America is our deportation of our own creator. They're talking about immigration. Let's bring in everybody. Anyone who wants to come to America, let them come on in. Won't even check their IDs. From what I can tell, they would allow every person on planet Earth to come into America without even knowing who they are or what they're about. But the one being that these same people are doing everything they can to push out of our country is our own creator. Now let me ask you a question, sir. If there's somebody who you love, especially if it's someone you created, like let's say your child, you love that child, you created that child's a part of you, you want a relationship with that child more than a relationship with all those strangers in this world. But the child keeps coming to you and saying, get away from me, I want nothing to do with you, I hate you. At some point, not only is it going to break your heart, but at some point you're going to give them what they want. And you're going to leave, and you're going to stay out of their lives, and you're going to say, I have no choice but to let my child learn the hard way. What do you think our Creator's doing? He created us for a reason, and these leftists, these atheists, these people are saying we need to get this Creator out of this country. And the Creator is leaving this country. As those people have taken control over this country, everything in this nation has taken a nosedive. There's a correlation there that cannot be ignored. Sir, those are the 50 greatest threats, existential threats to America as I see it. I can't thank you enough for watching this video. I sure hope this gave you some great food for thought. Again, I will make more videos that take 10 of these threats in depth afterwards. Please have your staff review those and give you any information in there that you find relevant. I am so grateful that you are watching this video. I am grateful for so much that you're doing. Thank you for your service to this nation, sir. It's an honor and a privilege to be able to address you here. God bless you and your family.